Welcome to the We Fucking Love Startups podcast. I'm your host, Troy Hammond. This is episode number 1. And so hopefully you enjoy this series of podcasts. Today's episode and our feature episode, our first episode, is with Serge van Dam. If you think startups in New Zealand, let's be honest, the first name that you think of is Serge van Dam. He's fucking everywhere.
Kia ora. Thanks for tuning in to the We Fucking Love Startups podcast, brought to you by Talent Army.
This is our inaugural first podcast for the We Fucking Love Startups podcast with our big sticker over there. And as I said to you, the premise of this was that we hear really, really amazing stories as recruiters, and a lot of the time you're that person in the middle, just the world going around you and hearing stories around why people want to get into startups, why they want to change jobs, why they created the startup, what they did. And, you know, it just felt really too selfish not to share these stories. And so when we started thinking about doing a podcast, one of the first people I thought of was you, because you're in a similar situation to me, right? That you meet all these really interesting people, that you help them. You know, you're really big in marketing and sales and promoting and probably giving a little bit more than most investors, directors do. And so I was really keen to understand, you know, some of your stories as well that you could share with, you know, our audience. And so, but before we do that, I guess, you know, let's go back and understand the man, Serge van Dam, the guy in New Zealand who is known officially as Serge van Dam. I never hear just Serge. It's always Serge van Dam. So tell me about you. Like, where did you actually grow up?
Yeah, so I was born in Buenos Aires, Argentina. My parents are Dutch and German, hence my last name. And I moved to New Zealand as a 10-year-old. So my parents were migrants in Argentina, and I was a migrant when I moved here at 10 and moved to Wellington, went to high school and university here.
How was that? How was the change? Do you remember it?
Yeah, I remember it. I guess I always liked rugby, which made the move to New Zealand easy. And you know, I guess the trigger for us moving, as I said, my parents were migrants. My mum owned a pharmacy, and in the 9 years she owned it, she was held up 15 times. And
oh, wow.
the last time she left my little sister in the office at the back and ran out, and then remembered my little sister was there, and they'd kind of had enough of criminality, I guess, and wanted us to grow up in a clean, green, safe place. And I'm very glad they did that, because I feel, both as a teenager and now, that the world's my oyster and I have all the freedoms that I could imagine.
And did they move to Wellington?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, cool. So you were 10, moved to Wellington, like complete culture shock, and then started school in New Zealand. What was that like?
I think it was pretty easy. New Zealand's got a relatively high migrant population, so you're a bit weird, but not totally weird.
Yeah.
And again, I liked rugby, and, you know, because my parents were migrants, we assimilated, you know, made efforts to assimilate and not find a whole lot of other Latin Americans, but actually make friends with Kiwis and adopt the culture and eat the bad stuff and, you know, do the silly things and, you know, all the things the local culture expected of you, I guess. And, you know, and I'm largely a Kiwi now.
Awesome. And so did you speak English?
A little bit, a little bit of school English, because in Argentina, in private schools, most kids learn English as a second language in the same way that maybe 20, 30 years ago you learnt French, and probably in New Zealand now you're learning Māori. Yeah,
it's a lot harder though when you land in the country and everyone's talking really fast and you're trying to figure it out. After just travelling around Europe and thinking that I knew enough, I clearly didn't. Yeah,
but kids are so forgiving as well. They, you know, kids want to make friends, and, you know, the default position of a child, and you've got kids as I do, is that, you know, they just want to be friends with people. They don't really look at boundaries or reasons not to, or points of difference. They want you to be their friends, and that was definitely my experience, by and large.
Especially if you play rugby in New Zealand, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so tell me about the childhood of Serge van Dam in Wellington then. Like, so what was it like? Like, talk me through, did you, did your mum, was she entrepreneurial when she came here as well, or did their parents change fields when they got here? Yeah,
so my dad was in IT, which I don't really know what that meant. He was a data architect, as it turns out, which I had no idea what that meant, and probably half still don't. And then my mum was a pharmacist and actually quite entrepreneurial, had her own pharmacy, but she couldn't practice pharmacy when we moved here. And she didn't speak particularly good English either, so she ended up doing back office jobs, I guess, in chemistry. So she was a chemical analyst at Tip Top Ice Creams, so we had a lot of ice cream in the house when I was a teenager, so that made me even more popular.
Awesome.
but she was sort of unable to be entrepreneurial. She ended up kind of doing some of that, and I guess that's a sacrifice of migrants, and and it's not a particularly terrible sacrifice compared to what other people experience, but it gives me sympathy, and I think it's part of what encourages you or gives you more drive to do better, intergenerationally to do better, and I think that's why migrants end up doing so well in almost every country.
Yeah, it's amazing. Hey, when like after someone has just traveled around the world, just got back, you start to realize, again, how empathetic you are to people around the world that are going through things a lot harder than us and the challenges that they face. And so do you think that determine the person that you are, like your family's challenges and your upbringing, or do you feel like you had a pretty easy run in terms of childhood?
Well, I think in terms of being loved and all of that, I had a pretty easy childhood. Parents, great parents, and they have always put us first, and that's part of the reason they moved. They moved so that we would have better opportunities.
Yeah.
And it does create a obligation as a human being to say, well, should have my parents up sticks to a new country where they knew absolutely no one, right? So that I would have more opportunities, and my brother and my two sisters would have more opportunities.
Yeah.
Then I should probably seize those. There must be something in that, and it's turned out to be the case. And I feel that way. And I don't do this for my, I don't do what I do for my parents, but I do feel I should embrace the opportunities I have in front of me and seize them.
Yeah.
And it's an amazing point in human history to be me, really,
awesome.
as it is for you.
Yeah, indeed. And do you feel like, is that the same for your kids now? Like, is that why you moved back to New Zealand, because of your kids or their childhood, their upbringing, or?
Well, I think it's, so I've lived overseas a couple of times. Lived in the US twice, lived in the UK. I think in some ways it's a different kind of set of opportunities, more about knowing their grandparents and having, similar sort of things that you had.
Yeah.
More than, the world is their oyster. I think they're privileged in almost every way.
Yeah.
So, there's something in wanting them to have those opportunities, but it's probably a bit more personal than sort of economic in the typical migrant sense.
Awesome. And then you went to high school here in Wellington and eventually studied psychology at university. Why did you study psychology?
Well, the only career conversation I ever had at school was with our careers advisor, and I said, one conversation, 15 minutes or something, which is crazy if you think about it. You go to school for 5 years, get good grades, study hard, or whatever you do, and then you get 15 minutes with a careers advisor. And I said, I want to work with people who invent things. And I didn't really know what I meant by that, but that's kind of what I want to do. I don't really want to go to university, even though I had good grades. And she kind of looked at me quizzically and said, you should probably go to university and get good grades, and because you've got good grades and you'll do well there. And that was really, she essentially ignored what I'd suggested, mostly because she didn't really, who invents things. Yeah. And obviously you and I both know that's what fucking startups do.
Yeah.
They invent the future. So that kind of didn't exist. And so then I thought, all my friends are going to Vic. I might as well do the same. And that's what I did. And I literally, this is the silliest thing imaginable, but it gives you a picture of my 17-year-old self, which is what has the ratio of most girls enrolled. And sociology was number 1, and psychology number 2, and French number 3. And so that's what I studied. And then I did a philosophy course because that was interesting to me. And then I ended up getting an honours degree in organisational psych because I thought sooner or later I might have to get a job. And that led to, I guess, my first job, which was HR consultant and doing a bit of recruitment and helping companies put in performance management systems and stuff like that.
And I think, from listening to podcasts that you've been on before, from reading articles, it sounds like you were thinking from a psych point of view, but from a marketing and people first, technology centric from that age. Like you were thinking of things and trying to tie things together that just we're only really doing now, in terms of say if I asked a marketing function now, what do they do in terms of that? How do they understand their customer? It's 100% different from now than what it was 20 years ago. And so was it people that drew you in, or was it, obviously it was women initially, but when you took that and then you went into HR consulting, what was it that drew you to the industry?
The original thing of interest to me was human behaviour and psychology generally, and I thought maybe I'll go and work in marketing. So that was my first set of interviews, actually, when I was still at uni. I remember the first one was at Saatchi & Saatchi, about a block from where we're sitting right now, and I said, how do you guys think about changing behaviour, because that's what you're in the business of? And they're like, oh no, we win lots of awards, that's really our focus. And I was so put off by that experience. And actually advertising agencies are largely the same still. They really don't care about changing behavior. They care about winning awards. And I was so put off by that, but that's what I was really interested in. And as you're sort of implying, marketing's come full circle too. And SaaS is perfect, right? You're trying to see what influences someone to buy, upgrade, use your features, whatever. The whole SaaS model is around making customers successful with your product. And so it's marketing's kind of gone full circle on that to what I was interested in originally.
100%.
So it's just timing, really.
And a lot of marketers and a lot of UX researchers that I interview now are psychology, graduates who have found that's their degree is actually helping hone their whole career in terms of who they are. And so it's
a bit of luck in my case, So I studied applied statistics as part of my degree. Well, that was entirely irrelevant in marketing 20 years ago. That's very relevant in all these startups. It's kind of the core engine of the business, as you're saying, whether it's a usability or the funnel or whatever it happens to be. It's really applied statistics, applied specifically to human behavior, and mostly in the B2B context for me, but it's still the same thing.
Would you do it again? Would you go back to university again, or would you?
No, I definitely would not. Had I had someone approached the 17-year-old me and gone, hey, we need an all-rounder to, write some content, put a website up, go and sell some stuff, do some data migration, whatever the things are, just, an all-round lackey. We're inventing the future of something, whatever it happens to be. I would have jumped at the opportunity.
And do you think that's the right decision for people now? Or do you so this is a debate that I get into all the time in terms of, do people need a degree for their career? In true early podcast styles, we've got one of our curtains falling down behind you, if that's the noise that you can hear, by the way. And so do you think people need to go to university? Now, obviously, there's careers where they definitively need to go to university, but what would you recommend to people listening that are debating, do I go to university or not?
I think the university is a very inefficient model for education, for personal growth, right? And it's expensive in the end. So the answer for me is not that. So if you think you need to do some growing, some more experience, and you've just taken your 13-year-old daughter, I think, overseas to do some experiencing, right? So I think we all need to do that, and especially in those influential years, teenage years. But, that comes in different forms and guises. You can go and be a prefect at a school in the UK. I know Sam Knowles, who's a prominent investor director who I work with. He spent a year in Kenya as a teacher. There's different ways of doing it, after you leave school, if you need some growing up or some context or just some life experience. Sitting in the quad at Vic is just one of the options, and it happens to be a very expensive and inefficient one.
I agree. And to be honest, every graduate that I interview that has the same 4 years experience at university versus 4 years experience traveling and honing, trying to figure something out, the EQ is a lot better if someone that hasn't gone to university. Yeah,
no doubt. And the beauty about the tech industry is, unlike, I've got a sister who's a medic and another sister who's a lawyer. Well, they need to have very formalized training for some very good reasons, particularly medicine, say. But the thing about the tech industry is it's quite easy to go into them. The hard criteria for getting in are quite low. Your ability to experience, especially in startups, 10 different things in a year are, so pronounced.
How do they get into startups though, right? This is the question I get all the time. Troy, I've got zero experience. I like the sound of startups. How do I get into it? And for me, it's harder because I'm an agency that charges money. So I have to say to them, unfortunately, look, it's unfair for me to represent you. But from your perspective, how do they get into startups?
Well, I think if you bring the right mindset, mindset's the most important thing. And if you're 18 years of age, to go back to the question, and what you're trying to optimize for is learning.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not trying to optimize for the most amount of money. If I wanted the most amount of money, I'd probably go and work in a mine in Western Australia.
Yeah.
Right. If that's your priority, go and do that.
Yeah.
If you're trying to optimize for learning, you go into the fastest pace environment you can think of. Ideally in a company going through a lot of positive turmoil, and that's what a startup really is in its first 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
And do every job imaginable.
Yeah.
And you can come out of it, and you've just learned so much. And I've been through so many startups myself, both as a founder and as an employee, and most recently as an investor and a board member, that I just know it's really pronounced. And I was thinking about this recently because we've launched one of the businesses I've been involved with, which recently launched Carbon Invoice, We've got an incredibly capable woman, Alex. She came from Germany, had done 15 years in corporate life, and she's like, corporate feels like not the place I'm going to maximize learning. She's just finished being a mum and moved to a new country, and in her 10 months with us, she's just she's done 8 different jobs, and just the rate of learning. Okay, she's not a grad, right? She's got deep experience and a degree. But it's just the rate of learning is just so pronounced in these startups. And it's the uncertainty that drives that. You actually don't know what you're going to become. So you've got to try all different kinds of things to figure that out. And the younger you are, the more roles there are, because there is no finance person, there is no marketing person, there is no events person, whatever it happens to be. There isn't anyone who's going to pick that up, and you've got the choice.
Is it for everyone?
Absolutely not.
And so what do you think the fundamentals are? Like, if you could say, because I I'm sure you get people all the time as well, some person who's been working in government for 35 years comes up to me and says, Troy, I really want to get into a startup. And I'll say to them, why? And do you know what you're going to get into? Are you prepared to, completely drop your salary and the likes? So what do you think the fundamentals are of a person's character that sort of goes into a startup?
If you had to answer that with one line, it's really someone who embraces uncertainty.
Yep.
I actually don't know how this is going to pan out. And I look at investors in the eyes and tell them that, like, you are giving me your money. Just to be clear, I actually don't know how it's going to pan out. I think this is a backable team, a backable idea, whatever it happens to be.
Yeah.
But we are talking about dealing with significant amounts of uncertainty. And, most of the population, the mammalian brain is not wired for relishing uncertainty. Mine is.
So pitch decks aren't the perfect picture of what's going to happen?
No, apparently the curves aren't perfect.
Yeah.
So no, exactly. So I think some people who embrace uncertainty and really are excited by that, they are dead certs for startups. Some people might not be born that way and say, I want to be more like that. But typically they find it very stressful. And so, I read, the sort of employee surveys and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And you can sort of, when you read language like burnout and all of this stuff, it is not tied to I'm working too hard. It's tied to this uncertainty is killing me. I'm working on a product. I don't know if it's actually going to work. I'm working on a feature that, I think someone else asked for, but I actually don't know if it's going to work, or we're changing our pricing, or I'm selling this product to this new segment and it's not resonating right now, right? That's burnout or some other version of that. Well, no, it's just, it's the uncertainty.
Yeah. It's just fucking hard.
Yeah. But I don't find it hard because I love it. Like if I knew what the result was going to be of all the work I'm doing this week, I'd find this week really boring.
Yeah. What do you think it is about founders in particular, right? So that have this amount of energy and have this intolerable attitude that it's going to happen no matter what. What do you think it is about that person or these people that drives them?
I don't know if I can turn it into a set of universals about that. There are people who just fundamentally believe something is broken and they're determined to fix it.
Do you think they fundamentally believe something's broken, or do you think they really want to get into a startup and they find something that could be broken? Like, to me, sometimes I meet people that really believe something's broken and want to fix it, and sometimes I meet people that I'm like, yeah, you just want to get into a startup and that was a little thing. So do you think that they fake it well, or? Well,
no, that's why I'm saying it's not a universal. I think I'd say at least 50% of the businesses I'm involved in one way or another, the founder is trying to solve a problem that they've experienced personally and they're determined to fix it. So, at the enterprise level, you take someone like Montoux, where Klaas Steinen used to be an actuary.
Yeah.
Actuaries play with spreadsheets. There's all sorts of
cloud-based. It's a pretty cool actuary surfing,
Yeah, so he's one of the cooler actuaries out there.
Yeah.
But, he was determined to, it just makes no sense for really mathematically capable people to build all the same spreadsheets everywhere around the world and use none of the cloud technologies, none of the AI. Like, to him, that was a silly thing. He was determined to fix it. Still is. Yeah. Right? So that's at the sort of enterprise level. At the, let's say, consumer end, you got someone like Tal at Tapi, who, was a flatting in a house, needed to get something repaired. It was all mayhem, millions of texts and emails to get a ceiling repaired in his flat. He's like, this is crazy. It should just be a workflow using, the camera in your phone and, all of that stuff. And so he was determined to fix that problem. And, he's quite far on the way to do that. I think Tapi's doing, thousands of maintenance jobs every month right now. So, that's at the sort of consumer experience level rather than at the professional level.
Yeah.
So I'd say at least half the founders are like that. And then you get people like Carlos Chambers who, at Carbon Invoice, who, is a lawyer, goes, trained, very capable person, decides he doesn't want to be a corporate person, wants to be in a startup, doesn't actually know which startup to be part of, doesn't necessarily have the idea, but goes, I want to be there. And, he's a phenomenal CEO and founder, but he started from I just want to be in that.
Yeah, but he had that brain. I met him. He rode his bike to a startup that I was involved in, Passive, going back many, many years ago, recruitment software. And he came out as one of the investors, other portfolio and people. And from the minute I met him, he was a startup CEO. Like he had that insatiable thirst to build, and you could see that resonated out of him.
Sure, but that's quite different to the kind who was trying to solve a specific problem.
True. Yeah, true.
So if Klaas was not trying to solve the actual problem, he probably wouldn't be doing another startup. I don't know, I haven't had that conversation with him, but I'd imagine he got here because he saw something that just simply wasn't working and made no sense to him.
Yeah, indeed. And is that like for you? So because your first startup, right? So you studied at university, you left university and went into HR and recruitment or talent management, sort of for IT companies. Exposed to a bit of the tech industry and thought, fuck, this is what I want to do now. And so then went and jumped into your own startup. Was that the approach that you had, or? Yeah,
well, the way that turned out, I had a good mate of mine who was running a clinic for Ascot Hospital in Auckland. So he was a couple of years grad like me. Yeah. And he's like, the whole medicine thing is all manual, faxes, like most of our appointments are done by fax. If you can believe it, this is 1999, 98. This is crazy. Here we are emailing and texting each other to organise, whatever, going surfing or mountain biking or whatever it is. Meantime, if you're getting a hip surgery at Ascot Hospital, you send a fax and then the specialists send another fax with illegible notes. This whole thing needs to be changed. And so we thought there was an opportunity to do a sort of medical messaging workflow. There was an opportunity in that, and we created a company called Maverick. Mm-hmm. And our first project that we tried to do was create a national pharmaceutical system, because at the time, the drugs, you basically went to your chemist, you got something printed out, you took it to your doctor. The whole thing was inefficient. There was actually no centralized tracking of any of that, let alone any sort of big data and analytics, any of that. And so we designed a system trying to convince the Ministry of Health that they should do that. I mean, the deputy CEO of Ministry of Health kind of basically said, why would we want to send any information electronically? And I was 23 or whatever at the time, trying to communicate that. It's a funny story because, as it happens, we had a pharmacist that we were using to get information, and we figured out that the codes, when you made a claim to ACC never validated whether the patient was a real person or not.
Oh, wow. So you could just send dummy invoices
and
the
that's
whole
what he
time.
did. I think he defrauded ACC for $6 million.
Wow, how did he get caught?
Yeah, before he got caught, random audit.
Oh, wow.
And the same handwriting on all the prescriptions. Yeah. And he went to jail for a little bit. But anyway, so inadvertently, the process demonstrated the system was absolutely silly. The whole thing was manual.
But you're like 20 years too early, right?
Totally.
And so that's what I fucking love about startups, though, right? Is like, this, 23 at the time?
Yeah.
23-year-old with his mate, 23, 24, trying to take on Ministry of Health in terms of trying to change something that was, like really early, like electronic internet, at health at the time. That passion to be able to just take on that and have a crack at it is something that I love. And what made you think that you could do it? Was it just immaturity?
Yeah, maturity. I know that's why obviously founders skew younger because they think they can kind of break the system. Which had you asked me at the start of that journey, do you think you can convince the Ministry of Health to do all these things? I would have gone, yeah, absolutely. Just my charisma and some PowerPoint, and I'll be there. Obviously, it did not turn out to be the case. So,
did you raise money?
No. I mean, there was no ecosystem for software startups at that time whatsoever. So, the chances of us doing that were nil. There was no one who'd actually done a software company at that point that I could find, let alone one in electronic medical records and automation and stuff.
But it got the bug.
Exactly. It got me interested. And so
We stop there, put a pin in there. So let's go back to university now. Like I'm interested to, what do you think universities could do to help the startup ecosystem? Like, what do you think? Do you think there's some sort of education out there apart from what you and everyone are doing that the tertiary system could help for entrepreneurs or founders?
That's a great question. Well, I think the first thing they should have is entrepreneurship program, which they kind of do, but actually
it's normally only part of it at BA.
Exactly,
things, right? And
exactly.
So,
it's part of a commerce degree. You can do entrepreneurship,
Yeah.
which is Commerce 301 or whatever it happens to be. I think that one thing they could offer is a venture building course.
Yeah.
Like actually go and build something that sells something that's real.
Yeah.
Well, and it doesn't have to be tech, of course, right? I mean, I went to my old intermediate school as part of a scholarship thing to go and talk to all the kids, and I met some 11-year-olds who'd built a what do you call the stuff you put on your lips?
Lip balm?
Lip balm, yeah. They built a lip balm business for boys because apparently all the flavours are for girls, like the cherry and the pink and all that stuff. So these 11-year-old guys had said, well, why can't we create them for boys? And so they had kind of, rugby and soccer insignia on the out of it, and they were all kind of black. And so, there's these 11-year-olds who, because they had a good teacher who helped them and sourced someone in China to make their lip balm thing. And so that spirit is there. And so 11-year-olds can do it off their own bat with a, constructive teacher. They're lucky, I guess. That should just be systematized in an academic context, and I just don't see any reason why it can't be.
I agree, and the rest of the world is doing it, right? Like there's education systems around the world that are actually enabling this, and I think you're right when you say at an early age. I think people are getting exposed to it. I'm not sure, but I grew up in Australia, and a part of our curriculum was to start a business. In school, to business plan, go out and try and start a business. And that was the first time I think I started getting super engaged at school, and it sort of pushed me on my journey to want to start companies. And I, started many companies since. But, that creative stage at an early age, we need to adopt that and continue it forward. And
you build lifelong passion for that. And actually, the most important thing is belief that you can change things.
Yeah.
Because, a lot of people, by the time they're done university, go and work in government or corporate or whatever, by the time they're 28, they sort of don't believe anything can change anymore. And, that's not the kind of citizens we want in our society, I don't think. And there's a real opportunity. And I think a part of it, which is and particularly true in New Zealand, is business is a dirty term, dirty capitalist or some other version of that. But, when I say business, I just mean an entity that has a product or service that's valuable.
Yeah.
It could be a social enterprise, it could be a private, it could be a provider of educational services, or, so the venture building, and probably that's why venture is probably better than a business as a language, just because of the Kiwi antipathy towards the term business. But just create a venture that solves a problem that you believe in. And if it's delivering nappies to impoverished people, great. If it's the next AI revolution, great. If it's making chapsticks for 12-year-old boys, that's fine too.
Awesome. That's such a cool idea. What are your thoughts? Talk me through, so as someone that didn't grow up in New Zealand and now pretty much considers myself a Kiwi, right? Like, I really love the culture here. I love business here. I love the number 8 wire methodology of New Zealand, but then I also frown on the tall poppy situation in New Zealand. And I think, we've got this number 8 wire methodology of entrepreneurialism and figuring things out and inventing, but then if it's successful, we frown on it. And so why do you think that is?
I have no idea. It's so embedded in the culture. I really have no good answer, but I agree it's a problem.
Yeah. And that's something that you do really well, and I've always respected, is that you really champion people and you push people up, and it's not bullshit the way you do it. Like your portfolio friends, even just people that you meet in this, like at a conference, I've seen you post about before and champion people. What is it? Why do you do it? And do you think others don't do it? What is it about you that wants to help and push people forward?
Well, I think that my method, if there is one for that, is, you can't talk about how great you are because, regardless of,
people stop listening very quickly.
Yeah, exactly. If I'd won 8 gold medals at the Olympics, in athletics, I still couldn't be sitting here telling you how good I am at athletics, even though clearly I would be.
Yeah. Well, you couldn't if you're New Zealander.
Yeah.
If you're American, you probably could.
Yeah, exactly. You could talk about it. So I think the easiest way to do it is to, and it goes to your question, is create a culture where other people do it to other people.
Yeah.
Since I'm prohibited for talking about how great I am,
Yeah.
I should just spend my energies talking about how great you are.
Yeah.
And we should do that for entrepreneurial people, and particularly people who have the courage to, like you and like the people I work with, who set up their own business, right? Against the odds,
Yeah.
they're prepared to sacrifice salary, take all the risk, know that people are going to poo-poo them and want them to fail, all of that stuff, right? They tolerate all that year after year.
Yeah.
What we should do, the least we can do for them is give them a pat on the back in public.
I agree. And so if Kaskin and Flynn, your sons, decided they came to you with the business plan for Maverick, now, circumstances similar, and you knew it was going to absolutely fail, what advice would you give them? Like, talk me through, how would you let them make mistakes? Would you hold their hand a little bit?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. How would I deal with my kids if I thought they were going to fail? The first and most important thing you can do as a parent is take down the cost of failure.
Yeah.
I don't understand. When people kind of worry about failure, I'm like, what is actually the worst that could happen?
Yeah. Well, it's not. I think it's just a vernacular, right? Failure or learnings, right? And so,
Yeah, sure.
if you're teaching your children about learnings versus failure and psychological safety around, making mistakes. But so what would you do? Like, I guess, and bigger part of the question is, when people are pitching you really fucking shitty things, like, what do you go back with them, and how do you talk to them? How do you talk to them about it, or do you just say no, I'm not interested?
Well, most of my saying no to things is to do with the actual characteristics of the founder or founders, less to do with the idea. Most ideas, assuming the market is big enough, right? There are ideas that are just way too small, and so you kind of go, well, we've got a glass that has got a little lip on it there, and it's just nicer to feel, and you're like, okay, well, it's not that different, not that pretty easy to copy. Not enough glasses get sold for not enough money, and whatever. So there's ideas that just simply not big enough to warrant your attention. Yeah. So that's, I think, quite easy to deal with.
Yeah.
But most of the time, my saying no, it relates to the characteristics of the founder or founders around their level of ambition, their resilience, their ability to deal with uncertainty. And so we talked about, I said that's the DNA of people who relish startups, are people who relish living in a context of uncertainty and ambiguity.
Yeah.
And if you've got all the answers as a founder, then firstly, why do you need me? And secondly, you're telling me you don't like uncertainty because apparently you have all, you had all the answers before you started. So you're not someone who goes, whereas the best thing you can do is, these are 6 things I don't know.
Yeah.
Here's how I'm going to find this one out. I think this one's quite easy.
But do you think that's because people are scared to be honest with people? Like I deal with so many founders like you, right? And then I get phone calls at 10:30 at night with, holy fuck, what do I do here? Help me. Who else is doing this? Being really raw and honest. And I love the relationships that I have with these people. And then I get some founders that are like, they know everything, and I can tell straight away that they're just bullshitting their way through life. And so how do we make it easier for people to be a bit raw and when they're pitching, or how to be honest? I think I've heard you talk about it in a podcast before, is, here are the problems I know how to solve, here are the problems I don't know how to solve, and this is what I need help for. How do we give that to people, that freedom?
Well, I think that, I think there's a cultural element to that, and I don't really know how to change that, but I think relishing ambiguity, it is okay not to know how things are going to pan out. I mean, that's the real world. Like, how is the Ukraine-Russia thing going to pan out? You and I don't know. Yeah. That is the human condition. Now, whether we like it or not, which we don't, but that is a human condition. And so I think we should just accept that ambiguity and uncertainty are natural attributes of the environment we have as mammals. So there's kind of the cultural thing. And then I think there are some tactical things that don't help. Like pitching, I think, is a terrible idea. Yeah. I think pitching has not done the startup world any favors, because your job is to give confidence and certainty to investors who, if they're smart at all, know that the only thing you know is you don't actually know how it's going to pan out. Yeah. Right. So you've been working on problem A. Let's say you decide you figure out how to do cancer detection based on your something to do with your Apple Watch. Yep. Okay, great. Well, all I know is you've got an idea. You may be credible, right? But for you to tell me how the next 5 years are going to pan out.
But how do you do the hockey stick graph then?
Yeah, exactly. The hockey stick graph. Right? If you put one of those, I'm out. Yeah. Because it tells me you're either being dishonest, which is part of your question, right? Or you think you've actually know how many units you're going to sell of your widget in year 3. Well, of course you don't. You haven't even got a widget. You know, you don't even know the price point, you don't know the margin, you know, your distribution model. Of course, you have no flipping idea how many widgets you're going to sell. And what you should say is, you know, that's the condition we're in. Here's how we're going to find out, and here's the triggers and the dependencies and all of those things. And that process in itself tells you a lot about the founder and probably their intellectual rigor, which is really important here, because most of the things I work on are hard problems or new problems.
And so you, after university, startup doesn't work out, decide to like move away from that. You go back into the corporate world a little bit and do some stuff with Post, which is interesting, gives you experience of the corporate world. And then you and some friends set up MCOM. Did you guys have that? Like when you were pitching, talk me through, like, is this stuff that you're talking about now because you've learned it the hard way yourself, or is it just because you've seen it too many times?
About the pitching specifically?
Or just like, so talk me through, like, how do you go, because you guys went big fast, right? Like I
wouldn't say fast. It's always fast in hindsight.
Yeah.
I mean, the MCOM journey had been going for a couple of years before. Adam and Graham, who are the two founders there, you know, they're friends of mine, and we'd kind of been in a pseudo business before together. And then they're trying to give birth to this thing, MCOM, which stands for mobile commerce. The fundamental thesis is sooner or later people are going to want to do payments on their mobile phones.
Yeah.
And so that you know, there was a very, you know, there's a gestation period of 3 years of going nowhere. Well, no, not going nowhere, but moving very slowly, only directionally true.
And was it only because you knew that eventually people are going to be doing payments on their mobiles that gave you a true North Star? Or did you have other factors in terms of your hockey stick growth or your pitches that you...
No, just the master thesis. And the master thesis in almost all of these startups is true. Like the Maverick one, which is, you know, medical records are going to go online.
Yeah. And
understanding who gets prescribed what medicines is a really useful thing to understand and to do efficiently. Like that was true in 1998. It's absolutely true today. You know, has it been solved properly? No, we're a third of the way through solving that problem.
Yeah.
You know, in terms of the MCOM thing, mobile phones are going to get better. People are going to want to use their mobile phones for transactions. They're great authentication devices, or they will become. Like, you know, the thesis was very clear, and it's true. And in the case of mobile payments, you know, it's been and gone, absolutely the case. You know, we all now have payment devices.
Life.
Yeah. So, and that was the thesis, you know. We were totally right.
Yeah.
We would have gone faster and done better. I mean, we did pretty well, but we would have gone faster and done better had we had capital available to us.
Yeah.
But at that point in time, very little venture capital.
Yeah.
Certainly New Zealand had no tech sector to speak of.
Yeah.
And, you know, we didn't have credibility. There's, you know, 4 people who'd worked, broadly speaking, in corporate financial services with a general North Star, which is, we think, people are going to want to do this stuff on their mobile phone. And, you know,
we probably no salespeople at the time or anything.
Well, the CEO, Adam, was a very competent enterprise sales guy. So I think that's, you know, in some ways that's what gave momentum to the business.
Yeah.
But we had no rights to make claims. None of us had worked in mobile before. No one knew how the mobile phone was going to, you know, the iPhone had never been launched at that point.
Yeah.
You know. So, but we're making these claims. And we were laughed out of many rooms, right? Like, you know, no, that's why you have a wallet, is you have a card in it, and, you know.
Yeah.
And that's what will be the case. And, you know, if e-commerce takes off, you'll just put in your card information on the screen, and that'll be it. Well, not sure why you guys think this mobile phone thing's going to be big.
So did you join because of the problem? Did you join because of the friends? Or was it the thirst to get into the industry?
Nah, friends, yeah. The adventure, again, the uncertainty. Hey, you know, and my first thing was, actually the first exercise I ever did before I joined them is I painted a picture of what could be true, which was in Microsoft Word 2, I think, so I don't have a copy of it, but I wish I did. But predicted kind of, you know, I can't remember, it was like a day in the life of Bob.
Using his mobile phone for payments.
Yeah, payments, identity, and keyless entry into places as well. Yep. So, you know, I wrote a 2 or 3 page
I'd love to see that.
Yeah, I wish I had it because, you know, it would have been pretty ugly reading, but quite visionary in some ways. Yeah. But that was the thing. It's like, you know, this is what I believe will be true. You guys have broadly been speaking about this. Do you think that's going to be the case?
Yeah.
And then let's go. And so how are we going to do it? You know, what's the technology? How much capital will we need? Where will we live? You know, none of those things do we have an answer for, and we don't need it.
Yeah.
Right. The uncertainty is that's the exciting bit. If we had all the answers, it'd be quite dull. So I joined because of the friends, 2 people I trusted and 3 people I trusted and enjoyed working with, or I thought I would enjoy working with, a problem that was big enough to to give you 10 years of runway, because I think that vision document was a 10-year.
Yep.
Here's what could be true in 10 years. So,
Yep.
and then the uncertainty of it. And, I was lucky at the time I didn't have kids or anything like that.
Yeah.
So, the financial obligations, if I needed to sleep in a cardboard box, I would have done that.
Speaking of runway, like, what was the runway like back then? Like, what runway did you have at all times? Was it the smell of an oily
miserable,
rag?
Yeah, smell of oily rag, doing a little bit of services. So,
Yeah.
one of the guys, Graham, he did a bit of contract work to fund the company. So, the smell of an oily rag, I sliced my salary in half to go and do this.
And did you go in as marketing straight away, or did you sort of...
Sales and marketing.
Yeah. Okay, great.
But again, back to the point, it's, it's 4 people. So it's not... sales and marketing means someone's got to buy the toilet paper and someone else has got to design your templates for your brochures and someone's got to put a test plan together, so all of those things. And that's fine. Again, accelerated learning.
Yeah.
I did so many things in those first 2 or 3 years.
Awesome. And then obviously it went well. Like you moved to the States in Atlanta, you partnered with Fiserv pretty heavily from the start and then eventually sold to them. And then you stayed on afterwards to work with Fiserv. So talk me through what I'm interested to know is that journey from New Zealand to the States. You would have been exposed to competitors or other SaaS companies or product companies even that were doing it from an American style. What's the difference, do you think, from 4 Kiwis jumping on a plane and going to the States in a GFC, you fucking mad guys, by the way, to then seeing the American counterparts doing it? What do you think the fundamental differences are?
Yeah, well, the first thing is they were capitalised. We were smell of oily rag with lots of proof points and much more product than all of our competitors, but they had 20 salespeople to our 1.25, and they were very well funded, which made them sloppy, but also unable to compete. They could run conferences, they could have booths at conferences. I mean, our first conference we ever went to, we begged Unisys to let us sit at their booth so that we didn't have to pay, that sort of stuff. Whereas our competitors go, we got to fork out 40 grand to be at a conference. That's, which to us was exorbitant. That's like 2/3 of a developer in those days. Yeah. So we would. So I think the realization that you're always going to be the David and the David Goliath scenario, and so how do you use that to your advantage? And I think that worked well for us for a period. I mean, again, if we'd been well capitalized, we probably would have done better. But knowing that you're the underdog makes you think about that, and you use sports analogies or whatever else. But if you know you're the underdog, you've got to figure that out. Right?
Yeah, indeed.
So that was, that's definitely part of it. And then the other part is just how massive the market is. And when you realize how big it is, you can just find niches, or there's just so many nooks and crannies that you can go and find and make a business out of. And that's that was really, you could intellectually understand it, but it's not till you're in that market that you realize how much that is true.
Well, it's the total opposite of the New Zealand market, right? Where you have to be so generalised to be able to apply to everyone, and there you can be completely niche, right? And exactly. And everyone's niche over there. And so, all right, well, in the spirit of time, right, because I want to get some other stuff, Serge. Business was sold. You stayed on for a couple of years, spent some time learning how to work in a big corporate. Sick of that, or yearning to move home? What was it?
No. So we decided to move home, and then Fiserv offered me a global role, and I thought I've never worked for a big Fortune 500 company, and it'd be useful to work for an American company, and so I signed up for another 2 years to do that. And I didn't know what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, so it kind of postponed that decision.
Yeah. So that was from New Zealand?
Correct. I was here, but I did a global role and had a terrible carbon footprint and did a lot of traveling and a lot of funny time zones. But I was well paid and doing working for a tier 1 company with a real top notch executive and really good performance. So it was it was good to be part of that. And I learned about, I guess the mentality for big American companies, and so that's useful. It's useful now, and it's a useful process to go through, and also confirm what I already believed, which is I fucking love startups.
Good plug.
So I love the early days, the ambiguity and the uncertainty. Right, when you're doing forecasting calls and all of these things, that you got to do them when you're a big company, but that's not. I don't get out of bed to go. I can't wait to have that forecasting call. And
so that's why you quit then?
No, it was always a 2-year thing. But I was just, I went in there going, I like to think of myself as a lifelong learner. I went, I'm going to do 2 years. I'm going to learn what I can out of a big, successful American corporate, and then take those learnings and apply them if I can.
Awesome.
And that's what I did.
And in that manner of wanting to get in and help, and early stage companies again came out, and you decided to throw it all in and work with early stage companies in New Zealand. Why?
Because I fucking love startups.
Yeah.
That's
But do you, because you don't, as a governance director person, right? You're not as involved in the startup. So like, why did you decide to do it from the outside?
No, because those people who know me know I'm hands-on. No, I mean, being a director is just an excuse to have clause, I guess, or, your influence is a bit deeper, because I can make a suggestion and then I can follow it up with a stick.
Yeah.
So, do I love board meetings? No, I don't think anybody does. But do I love having ideas and seeing them through? Yeah. Yeah, that's it. So
awesome. And so how do you do that? Like, how do you switch from someone who's an entrepreneur or employed, and and then all of a sudden work with early stage startups, and how do you offer real honest advice and help follow that through?
I just be in the mix. I mean, I'm in the mix. This year I've sold 6 different products. I'm still selling software to various parties around the globe, and so I'm just in the mix. Now, there's a point at which companies grow out of needing you to do that. So a company like Re-Leased, they don't, they've got a perfectly good executive team and an incredible head of growth there with deep experience. Do they need me to sell their product? Absolutely not. So at some point they outgrow you. And they don't really want you in the weeds, and that's okay. If I can still contribute, I'll stay. If I can't, then it's time to move on, and I'm okay with that. I'm very unemotive, again, a bit parent-like. At some point, your kids want to leave home.
Yeah.
It's not a personal, it's not a personal affront to your parenting style or your personality quirks. They want to go and do their own thing.
Same with me. They build internal teams, and you're just happy to see them grow, right? And
so you've just handed off the reins, right? It's not a problem per se. It's a next phase, and I'm perfectly fine with that. It's a sign of success. But I'm in the weeds whenever I can, and I'm happy. And then when I'm in the weeds, not when I'm reviewing a balance sheet.
And then you're also doing other things, right? Like you Kiss My SaaS, you're involved with Movac, you're in Archangel 2020, Archangel of the Year. Tell me about that. Tell me about the stuff that really you're really passionate about, and that you really gets you going.
Yeah, so the way my portfolio life is 80% of my time is on specific companies that I'm active in, and most of those I'm a director for, and then 20% of my time is on the ecosystem, right, which is not directly benefiting me, but making sure that there's a future. And so, as you said, I'm in Movac, New Zealand's largest venture fund. I'm an operating partner, and I just help out when I can. I'm involved with Kiwi SaaS, which is the industry body, and what we're trying to really do is build capability for SaaS, because there is no university set of courses for the kind of roles, and it's the biggest opportunity we have to re-engineer our economy away from animal agriculture and sort of carbon intensive stuff into highly productive activities. So I really believe in that, and so if there's people here who are thinking or are part of SaaS companies, you should join Kiwi SaaS. We run a whole lot of events, and there's a whole lot of content and all of that stuff, but we're really trying to build capability. That's really the purpose of it, and we'll set up a SaaS Academy next year to do some training courses and all of that stuff. And then I do a little bit of stuff on the policy side of government, mostly through Ministry of Business, but also through New Zealand Trade and Enterprise. And again, it's just
stuff.
and it's just to make sure that there's the underlying conditions in terms of government policy where I can influence them efficiently are swayed towards my vision of the economy, which is whole lot of startups just inventing the future. I mean, that's the best bet we have for unleashing the human capital of New Zealand and actually just lifting our productivity and paying for the next generation of hospitals and schools.
Do you think the government's there now?
I think there's intent there. So I actually think the will is there, certainly in the current administration. Most people now in government have never worked outside of government, and so they haven't been in a fucking startup. And sort of, they can intellectualize but cannot really experience the potential. And most people can't really visualize what an economy would look like. What would Wellington look like if we had 20 companies like Xero here? Right? It'd be a very different city, and obviously much more productive and richer. And I think the general intent is there, partly because the macro trends like climate change and those things, partly because the fastest growing sector in the New Zealand economy is the SaaS sector. We've grown at 16% compounding for the last 5 years, which, for a significant sector of the economy is a crazy growth rate. And that's without having a single degree or any tertiary education available, no education of teenagers, not a single careers advisor who knows anything about the sector.
Yeah.
So without those things, we're still growing at 16%. So if we fix them, imagine what's possible.
And so how do we keep these people now that have been in the country for the last 2.5 years, stuck here, and now that are just wanting to explode and go off into the world? Or do you let them go off into explode in the world and hope something come back with that raw potential and experience that they've got?
Yeah, both of those things. I mean, obviously I was somebody who went to the US, learned a shitload. Yes, we sold a business. And then I worked for that American company for a couple of years, but I've got a whole lot more to contribute. Yeah. Right. My ability to contribute to companies in New Zealand that are going global is a lot more pronounced than it was, 12 years ago. Mm-hmm. And then I think we should do our best to engage some of the people who want to go offshore, ideally in our globally facing companies, and send them there, right? Yep. Take Re-Leased, who I mentioned before. Our intention is to hire salespeople here and over time ship them off to the US if they want to go there, or to the UK, and that's fine. That's a way of keeping the productivity growth and the IP, at least to some extent, headquartered in New Zealand, while still allowing people to go and do their travelling and their personal development in other parts of the world. It's unrealistic to hope. It's unrealistic and unproductive to hope that everyone will just want to stay here and work in New Zealand for a New Zealand company doing the same job they've always done. That's unhelpful. So. And
I think we've got more and more opportunity now with what COVID's done to be global companies from day one now, and let people travel the world and work remotely and the like, as long as they're getting their job done. It's been proven now that people can work remotely. And so we haven't got much time left, Serge. So I guess what I'm keen to understand from you is in terms of the ecosystem, what's something that you would really love to see happen? Is there something that you're particularly passionate about? Or obviously you've got Kiss My SaaS and you've got all these courses in terms of helping people get in, but is there anything else that really gets you out of bed in the morning?
Yeah, there's a few things they might seem conceptual. The first one is New Zealand is investing in going global. New Zealand companies, ideally startups, right? One of the absolute tragedies is the capital for many of the going global successful companies is not from New Zealanders. So New Zealanders on average are not benefiting, and that's a total failure of the Kiwi saver funds and other equivalents. So I think that's a concrete problem to be solved, is figuring that out and having demand side. If you are a part of a Kiwi saver, right, or if you're talking to your local MP, why isn't NZ Super investing in startups? And there's lots of excuses for that, but they're all solvable things. Mm-hmm. So, that's kind of the capital question. I think getting young people, we talked about, getting young people to understand the opportunities, whether that's through university or doing careers events for the tech sector or whatever, to get people excited and understand the potential, right? In order to change the world, it's within reach of a lot of people if they set their mind to it. And a lot of the people who are optimistic and do like uncertainty and ambiguity when they're young and optimistic and have little to lose, all we have to do is expose them to the sector. So I'm really passionate about exposing young people to the kind of companies I work with and that you work with.
Yeah. I've always thought about work. In Australia, we did work experience. I'm not sure if you do it here in New Zealand.
Not really.
Yeah, and I've said to so many founders, we should be doing work experience for kids, getting them in for 2 weeks and just exposing them to it so that they can see it as part of their curriculum in high school. And so, yeah. Hey, so hearing stories like yours and everyone's, and I'm sure you hear all these stories yourself, really makes me happy. I love hearing these stories. I love being able to articulate these stories when I'm going off and searching for candidates, and then telling the story of a startup or telling the story of a founder of a person, because that's for me why I want them to join. That startup is the story, and so that makes me really happy. What makes you happy, mate? What is it? What's the one thing that you would say, or anything that makes you super happy?
It's a total cliche, but human flourishing, right? You thought, you being an individual, whether they are 22 or 32, right? You thought you're only capable of this. We created an environment, i.e. in a startup, where the sky was the limit, so to speak. You could go into global markets, you can build anything with software, you can create a website giving whatever proposition, right? And so that the flourishing of individuals is what makes me happy. So it's, it feels it feels cliche to say it, but if I reflect back on a great day, it's typically someone who was doing this and is now doing that. That's what keeps me excited. And there's an unlimited potential for both for those individuals and then a whole lot of other individuals for whom that could be true. And that's what I hope happens. And I think startups are the best mechanism for enabling that.
Awesome, mate. Well, I think that's a good point to wrap up on. I'm glad we both fucking love startups, and I wish and hope that more people get involved and see their potential like you're talking about now, mate. So thanks for joining us.
Awesome.
Cheers.
Happy to be here.
Wow, episode 1 in the bag. Thank you so much, Serge van Dam. What I really loved about that podcast was we really need to lift the profile on how we teach entrepreneurialism, how we teach people to run and start a business, and to hear that there's people like Serge and other people around New Zealand that are really helping to try and lift that game makes me very excited. I think there's more we can do in that space, and I think there's a group effort involved there. We can actually get together and help each other in terms of lifting the profile. So please let me know in the comments below, what do you think we need? How could we lobby Ministry of Education? How could we increase the entrepreneurial skill sets of our younger generation? So let us know in the comments below, and let me know who you want to hear from in this series. I hope you enjoyed this one as much as me. Thank you.